I'm Ken Perry with General Dynamics Electric Boat, and I have the distinct privilege of introducing our next speaker, U.S. Senator from Rhode Island, Senator Sen Whitehouse. I actually have a few comments. We have his bio in the program, which shows his long and distinguished career in public service, both here in Rhode Island and in Washington. The senator was first elected in 2006 to the U.S. Senate and re-elected in 2012. He's in his second term. He's a member of numerous key committees and the ranking member of the Judiciary Subcommittee on Crime and Terrorism, as well as the ranking member on the Environmental and Public Works Subcommittee on Clean Air and Nuclear Safety members. No stranger to the Newport waterfront, just 2 weeks ago, right up at Antex, the senator said, "Antex can be the Paris Air Show of unmanned underwater vehicles." So with the support of folks like you in the defense industry and the thousands of defense industry professionals who design, build, and deliver capabilities right here in Rhode Island and southeastern southeastern New England, we'll all get there. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the U.S. Senator from Rhode Island, Senator Sen Whitehouse.
Thank you, Ken. Good morning, everyone. It is wonderful to be with you and to see SENEDIA continuing to flourish here in Rhode Island. We're very proud of the work you do and appreciate very much the great job that Molly does representing you with the delegation. I know that my senior senator, who has a lot more clout in this area than I do as the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee and as a leading appropriator, has spoken to you already. I know you'll also see Representative Cicilline and Representative Langevin, and I hope that that is an indication of how closely the Rhode Island delegation wants to work with SENEDIA and support our defense industry here. It is really quite vital. The topic that I wanted to talk a little bit with you about this morning was cybersecurity. And of course, while we have a general threat to our country from cyber hazards and cyber infiltrations, when you're in the defense industry, you have a particular hazard because it is a target for many of our most capable adversaries on the cyber plane. And I don't think that the Department of Defense looks kindly on contractors who have allowed foreign agents into their cyber channels. So it's really important for NUIC, for SENEDIA, for the ecosystem that supports the military and research presence here in Rhode Island, that we get this right here. So we obviously see a very considerable threat. We have everything from overseas criminals who are all about trying to hack into people's accounts or to get them to hit that key little link or to think that it actually is helpful to share your banking information with them. And their job is simply to steal. That's as old as time. This is a new vector for it. They're still doing it. We see not just individual criminals, but we see full-on nation states supporting, protecting, and licensing the theft of America's intellectual property. It's a little bit like the old days when a pirate would get letters of marque from a government, and that would legitimize their ability to go out and rampage on the high seas. We have a lot of actors who have the modern cyber equivalent of letters of marque from their government to come after our intellectual property. And they're doing a really good job of it, and we need to improve on that front as well. As the tragedy that's playing out in Texas makes all too apparent, modern American life is dependent on critical infrastructure. We need our electric grid particularly, we need our information systems, and we need a lot of other systems that run like off of SCADA systems and cyber networks. So defending our critical infrastructure is important, and it is a real wartime vulnerability or a terrorist vulnerability. And so we have to continue to make sure that our critical infrastructure is protected, whether it's banks or the grid or communication systems. There are a whole variety of infrastructure elements in our country that if they go down, we have real problems on our hands. And we are nowhere near protected adequately on the critical infrastructure front. And finally, we've seen that even our elections are vulnerable to hacking and to foreign mischief. So we've had a lot of wake-up calls, and it's time we really started to listen. When I got on the Senate Intelligence Committee, I started and then chaired the Intelligence Committee Cyber Task Force, and along with then Senator Olympia Snowe, I wrote the first Intelligence Committee report on cyber. So that's back in 2010, I've been banging away at this for a while. I was the Democrats' principal negotiator the last time we tried to get a comprehensive cyber bill through the Senate. I was negotiating with the number 2 on the Republican side, so I thought I was in pretty good shape. Turned out the number 1 on the Republican side didn't want the bill, and number 2 and number 1 is a big difference. And just recently, I co-chaired the Center for Strategic and International Studies Cyber Policy Task Force with Chairman McCall from the House. In that role, I was stepping into the shoes of Jim Langevin, who had been the co-chair of previous bipartisan CSIS cyber report. So Rhode Island has good credentials in that sense. And I'm working right now with Tom Bossert in the White House to try to make sure that we can work in a bipartisan fashion together with the executive branch on the steps that we need to take to shore up our cyber protections. They got their executive order out. The executive order basically pings a whole bunch of agencies and says, get stuff back to us. So we're in kind of the pause, waiting for the get backs to happen. And I'm in touch with Tom about what we can do to try to move things along in that period, because it spans a fairly considerable time before all the information is back. We shouldn't be waiting until the last thing comes in. We should be starting to figure out what it is that we need to do. So, what is it that we need to do? Well, one thing that we need to do is we need to communicate a heck of a lot better with the American public about what the cyber risk looks like. We're a democracy, and if the public is not informed and engaged on an important risk, then we in government are not going to be able to meet that risk with adequate strength and resolve. We simply have to have the public with us. And we have 2 very significant problems. One is that in the government side, we overclassify the hell out of everything. And so it's really hard to get information out about what is happening in our systems unless you've got somebody who is a declassifier who can disclose it. Otherwise, trying to go through the declassification process is torture. We can't help you on the Senate side. The Senate Intelligence Committee's declassification process is so turgid, complicated, and obsolete that it has never successfully been used, ever, once. So we've got to figure that out. And at the same time, the private sector companies don't want to embarrass themselves or be outed for whatever cyber problems they have had. So they're not very good at disclosing. And the net effect is that we are dramatically under-disclosing. And I think that we need somebody, perhaps at the National Security Council, where we're working with Tom as to where it would be a good place, who's kind of the discloser in chief. You don't want to necessarily name and shame a specific bank, but you sure as heck want the public to know that this bank got hacked for $40 million. A bank, X bank. And this bank did too, and this happened over here. And here's where a electric utility caught somebody in its SCADA system. We need all of that information out in a comprehensible way so that the public can stay with us and can understand the risks. You'll be less likely to hit that link if in the back of your mind you understand that the internet is a dangerous place. So, disclosure in chief. The next role is, I was the U.S. Attorney here, I was the Attorney General here. We've got to beef up the Department of Justice in its ability to get after these issues. They need to be adequately staffed. There needs to be a very aggressive position on this taken by the department. I was thrilled when they finally indicted the Chinese military officials. That took a lot of internal toing and froing about what the diplomatic consequences would be. Turns out I think that was really the right decision. We need to continue on that. We also need to make sure the Department of Justice is out there regularly scrubbing botnets off the internet. The internet is a garden that is overrun with weeds in the form of botnets. We've had hearing after hearing in which not one witness has come forward to explain a single salutary reason for a botnet on the internet. There is no value to these things. They are a huge risk. And we can't get after them until they've actually started committing fraud or present an immediate national security risk. We need to have a much more advanced look at cyber hygiene, and there should be a group within the Department of Justice that is out there stripping the internet of botnets on a regular, constant, absolute basis. And it's not hard. You just have to go into court, civil proceeding, get permission to take it down. The company that's providing the service usually wants them taken down. They're happy to obey the order. The people who are on the wrong side don't show up. So it's ex parte, and on you go to the next one. It is a winnable front in this battle. We just need to make sure we keep at it. Might be worth also looking at trying to pull more aggressively on the diplomatic side a coalition of willing allies together to set an agreement on what's acceptable and what's not in cyber world. We don't need to work with the Russians on this. We don't need to work with the Chinese on this. They will not work with us in good faith on this, so we should not bother. But we could start with the Five Eyes, and we could go on to a lot of our EU friends, and we could pull together a very significant critical mass of countries that will say, here's what's acceptable, here is what is not, here are the consequences if you transgress on what is acceptable, and you can begin to build a basis for deterrence. You can't build deterrence around unknown boundaries and unknown sanctions. I think we could also stand perhaps to take another look at the old-fashioned militia model, so that people who are really good at this can help their government. In this particular area of national defense, it really doesn't matter how your hair is cut, doesn't matter how many push-ups you can do, doesn't matter how straight you shoot. What matters is, do you understand this internet world? And making sure we reach out to people who have the capabilities in this world and that they can participate on terms that they're comfortable with, I think would be a very useful idea. Finally, we have got to stress test the NIST framework. The NIST framework has been a good process. The critical infrastructure industries that have participated in it have enjoyed it. They speak highly of it. But sometimes people speak highly of a process because it has demanded so little of them that it's easy to play along. And we want to make sure that's not why everybody's happy with the NIST process. We want to make sure that it's actually doing the job of protecting our critical infrastructure. And the initial signs aren't good. At a public meeting, the head of the utility grid section of the NIST framework was asked by me, can we count on what is happening through the NIST framework process to be assured that our electric grid is adequately protected from cyber attack? And he said, Senator, no. And he waited a minute and he said, can I amend that answer? I said, of course, sir. He said, make that hell no. So probably the greatest cybersecurity critical infrastructure liability we have is the grid. And when the guy in charge of the private sector coordination of cybersecurity protection on the grid is saying not only no, but hell no to is the NIST framework process working, time for a stress test. We really need to get that done. Congress can pass some laws in this area, particularly supporting the Department of Justice and getting after the botnets. Frankly, we ought to demand that there be a roving inspector general or somebody who has the capability to go through the civilian agencies of the executive branch and white hat penetrate them. Go after them, see what they're doing. There's no reason that we should have found out that the Office of Personnel Management could be hacked by the Chinese before some U.S. government white hat enterprise had looked at it and found out, oh boy, we can get right in. Right now we have 73 inspectors general You cannot tell me that 73 inspectors general are each going to have adequate capability in this space. We need to consolidate that into a single office that can be the aggressive tester and do red teaming and white hat penetrations. The last thing is, you guys in the private sector, we need to have a really good conversation with you all about active defense of your own networks. I don't know what the answer is. I'll be very candid. There are a lot of reasons why we should not permit private actors to engage in active defense of their own networks. But it ought to be a topic of conversation. There ought to be a high-level conversation happening in this country about, should it be done, under what circumstances should it be done, who should approve it if it's going to be done, should you have to go through Cyber Command for approval, should you have to go through the Attorney General of the United States for approval, how do you set up the mechanism so that what is being done is appropriate, known, and licensed, but nevertheless allows the private sector to do its necessary defenses. It is wrong that we are not having that conversation at this point, and I'm going to work very hard to make sure that we start having that conversation. Let me close by talking just a little bit about Rhode Island. Let me, first of all, thank Senator Lou DePalma and Representative Ken Ucci for being here. They serve with real distinction in our General Assembly, and I appreciate that they have another reason for being here than their hats of public service, but I nevertheless appreciate them very much. I've worked with Timmy Dale Judas of Raytheon for a long time, and he has done an enormous amount to bring all of this together, and I'm very proud of his work. Scott D. Pasquale isn't here, but he ran Utilidata before Raytheon scooped him up and was the head of the governor's cyber council and has been a real asset for us. And institutionally, we've got a lot going on. We've got the Naval War College, we've got Salve Regina, we've got not one but two centers of excellence at the University of Rhode Island. We have that immense supercomputer at Brown and people like John Savage who are absolutely expert in this area. We have one of the first and best state police cyber units. Our National Guard has a cyber wing deployed out at Quonset. And we have stars in the cyber firmament here in Rhode Island. What we have not yet done is turned those stars into a definable constellation that has a theme and has a consistency and can help project Rhode Island as a place where we can lead the battle for cybersecurity. We are close to that. We are working on it. The governor's support for this is very strong, and I think this is an effort where not only does the United States need to exert more leadership, but Rhode Island is in a position to exert considerable leadership. We are very small. We all know each other. We bump into each other at the church or at the market or at the soccer game or wherever, and the result is we can actually get quite a lot done with a little bit less hassle and fuss than in other bigger states. So this needs to be a topic, and I'm thrilled that you guys are all here talking about it. So with much appreciation, I'm glad to have had this chance. And if I can be helpful in any way, you know, we have a really good constituent to senator ratio in Rhode Island. So please don't hesitate to reach out as the information begins to come back from the executive agencies to Tom Bossert in the White House. In the coming months, we are going to be actively engaged in this issue. I have the pleasure of serving with Lindsey Graham as the chair of my Judiciary Subcommittee on Crime and Terror, which is the subcommittee in which this work would be done. Lindsey is very keen to get things done in this area. He's a very smart guy, and he takes this very, very seriously. So we have a lot coming up in the next few months. Big opportunities are before us, and please push and shove to try to make sure that we get this done. Communicate what you think risks are. If you think I've missed something today, let me know. If you think one of those ideas is a bad idea or needs to be checked in some way, let me know. I'm in a constant state of listen and not just transmit. This is really important. We do not want to wake up one morning and find that a large section of our country is like Houston without the flooding. It's just shut down. And foreign actors or a terrorist actor or someone who we can't quite identify has bollocksed up the system so badly that for weeks we can't get, for instance, the grid back up and running. that is something we need to protect against at virtually all costs. Thank you for your attention. Have a great morning. And I guess I'm going to answer a couple questions.
Senator, thank you very much for your remarks and for being here. You mentioned that there's a big difference between number one and number two. And we appreciate...
Jack Reed's number one, I'm number two. Just so
appreciate your support of SENEDIA, all the defense organizations represented here to make sure that U.S. defense is second to none. Thank you very much, sir.
My pleasure, Ken. Thank you. Ken says I've got about 10 minutes for questions or comments. I'm sorry you may not have been warned of that, so this may be coming as stunning news, but in which case we can all go out and get coffee. But if you have a question or a comment, I've got another 10 minutes or so. Yes, sir. And the gentleman behind you after that. Question, how confident am I that policy changes can be made in the current administration? I think actually fairly good. I start with a very high opinion of Tom Bossert. He is not an ideologue. He does not come in with his hair on fire. He does not want to, he's not an extremist. He is just a pro, and he wants to get this right. And so it's been good working with him. I think on the congressional side, there's a lot of bipartisan support for this. We came pretty close last time on a major cyber bill. I mean, John Kyle was my coordinate on the other side. Very respected guy. But when push came to shove, I think a wave of politics washed through the building, and then Minority Leader McConnell went to the floor and said, I'm not letting a cyber bill come to the floor unless it has a repeal Obamacare amendment to it. So that was that. That's not going to happen now with him as Majority Leader. First of all, they've tried that and it didn't work, and they're done, I think. But second, now their motive is to try to get things done to show that they can govern. And I think that the trauma and the drama that constantly comes out of this White House is actually improving the resolve of Republicans in Congress to work together and get things done, as they increasingly learn that reliance on this White House is not easy. So the combination of having a good person in the White House who gets it, who's capable, who's experienced, who is not trying to score partisan points but really trying to do a good job, and that latent bipartisanship awaiting on this issue in the Congress allows, maybe I'm just whistling by the graveyard, but I feel very optimistic that we can get something very significant done. Behind you, yes, sir.
A question about Senator Rounds. I know you probably know Senator Rounds from the Armed Services Committee. I've heard him talk about trying to get a bill together for next year out of the Armed Services Committee about cybersecurity. He's held a couple hearings. Could you comment on that? Is there any effort between you and he?
At this point, that's strictly within Armed Services, and Jack Reed would be able to give you a better sense of where that's going within his committee. The jurisdiction of Armed Services in this area is very much, I think, absorbed in how Cyber Command is set up, and in what, from a policy point of view, the military has put together in terms of what its deterrence and countermeasures strategies are going to be. And that's a great thing for them to be looking at, and they should be. And again, I think there's very strong bipartisan support. And by the way, a word of good wishes and prayers to Senator McCain, who works exceedingly well with Jack Reed as chairman and ranking member of that committee, and who has a very, very tough diagnosis that he's had to contend with. He's a wonderful, wonderful man. So that's a really good committee for all of this to be bubbling up in, but it's very much captured within the turf territory of that committee. And I think they've got plenty to do. So we're looking at going forward. Our main coordinations with Homeland Security, Judiciary, Homeland Security are kind of the main ones that will be operating outside of the area of cyber command and military policy. And I think we'll have no trouble coming together when we start to get the signal from the White House that they're ready to play, that their information is in enough from the executive agencies that they can get to work. Again, I'm optimistic about the potential here. Yeah.
Senator, first I want to thank you for your service and for being here today. Very informative. I'm John Knott with JD Technologies, and we represent a number of manufacturers that sell into primes like Raytheon and General Dynamics. My question is, we hear a lot about cybersecurity, and it's going to take a while to implement a lot of these fixes and to really understand the problem. My specific question to you is, what do you see as the most critical, something we need to do sooner rather than later?
The top thing in my list of to-dos would be the stress test of the NIST framework of our critical infrastructure. I think we could have been working on that right from the very get-go, frankly. If, in fact, our critical infrastructure is not that secure, if, in fact, the CEO who leads the electric grid NIST framework subset is correct that it's hell no as to whether we're ready, then that's a really significant matter, and we need to get after it and figure out what the problem is. So, to me, that's the most urgent thing. I'd put right behind that pulling together an international group to start setting the international standards with a coalition of the willing as to what's acceptable and what's not acceptable in cyber world. And the sooner we get that up and the sooner we get a uniform signal out of we could probably easily get 20 major countries involved in that. And they'd be critical countries for the bad actors, particularly the bad actors in Russia and in the former Soviet states. These guys are thieves and they are crooks, and many of them are licensed by the government. And they operate at the sufferance of the government or government forces and institutions. And when they have stolen what they want to steal, they then need to come out of the corrupt world in which they live, and they need to move into rule of law world with their ill-gotten gains so that the next big fish in corrupt world doesn't come and just eat their lunch. They need to get into European banks and American banks. They need to be able to have accounts that are protected by rule of law, where they can't just be rolled by the next bigger crook who gets higher up in the food chain in the government and out-sanctions them and then cleans them out. So we have some real power with those people by sanctioning them out of that rule of law environment. We can have real effect, I believe, but we got to get everybody on the same page, and we got to put out a clear roadmap that says, if you're doing this, you're all done. You never get a bank account again in the real world. You're going to have to stay in that corrupt world and wait for the next bigger thief to come and steal what you've done. And I think that'll change behavior, and I think it'll change national behavior as well. One last, yes, sir.
Morning, Senator. Thank you.
Good morning.
Is there a thought that perhaps maybe there's an opportunity to look at decentralized infrastructure systems so that the impact is not large, but just locally centralized, that you have an opportunity to operate in a neighboring environment?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And we are generally moving towards a more distributed grid for unrelated reasons, having to do with the rise of clean energy and renewables and rooftop solar and so forth. So our grid is slowly getting less centralized, but it's happening very slowly. We are not there yet. That would be a very good place for that to happen. A lot of the other stuff is kind of by its nature a bit decentralized because the attack would go at a particular place. You'd go at a particular chemical plant's control system. You'd go at the systems that control the release of water from a dam, and that all kind of is by its nature specific. The other big area that's of considerable concern would be to create doubt in the public's mind that their bank account statements or their stock and bond account statements are secure and valid. And if you created enough doubt about that, you could create basically a run on banks with people, look, I'm not sure that they're going to be able to keep track of this. Somebody's hacked into the bank. I am worried. I need to get my money out. And you have, you know, Mary Poppins, I want my tuppence, on a large scale. With a run on a bank doesn't have to have a basis for it. It's a matter of public panic, and that can be created. And to have a strong sense that that can be cabined, I think would be useful. So you're absolutely right that more resilience and more separability should be a goal in what we are doing. Hard to do on the internet itself, and hard to do with communications systems because they have to interconnect in order to function. But that should be a goal, and you're just taking me beyond the limits of my capability to say any more than that. But thank you for what you're doing in that space, because that's a really good thing to be doing. Yeah. All right, thank you all. Have a great day. Thank you for being here. We love SENEDIA.